President Biden plans to sign his sweeping climate tax and health care bill as an analysis with the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office shows those earning less than $400,000 will pay an estimated $20 billion more in taxes over the next decade. Joining me now, President of the National Taxpayers Union, Pete Sepp. Pete, welcome back to the National Desk. Great to have you.
Great to be here.
So first of all, this out of control inflation is like having a flat tax on everyone. So no matter what economists say, one thing this bill will not do is reduce inflation. And that in and of itself is like having this extra tax. We're all paying this flat tax with inflation. But what does the preliminary analysis by the Congressional Budget Office show?
Well, actually worse than doing nothing under some scenarios. CBO has said that the effect will be minimal either way, and either way is the key term here. 0.1% total reduction in inflation or a 0.1% increase in inflation. I'm betting on increase in the short term because this bill front loads a lot of new spending on climate and whatnot, and it backloads the deficit reduction. Barely 7% of the deficit reduction in this 10-year bill occurs over the first 4 years. We all have to wait until later on to start getting the deficit reduction, and the reduction is gimmicks, unfortunately. They're doing something called repealing a rebate rule that the Trump administration had never actually enacted, and they're counting that as savings. It's like saying to your mortgage banker, hey, I'm not going to buy that $30,000 car, so can I get that money off my mortgage? It doesn't work that way in the real world.
And Pete, the Treasury Department reported, this is from the Treasury Department, that over the course of 10 years, 87,000 new or reassigned employees, that a majority are experienced auditors, will be added to the IRS. The CBO found that there will be increased scrutiny on filers earning less than $400,000 a year, and it would account for $20 billion over the next 10 years. Now, what I find interesting is that a Republican senator from Idaho sought to propose an amendment to make sure those making under $400,000 would be exempt from increased IRS scrutiny, but Democrats shot it down 51-50 in the bill. Why is that?
Because Democrats and some Republicans, unfortunately, don't understand that when you give the IRS an inch, they take a mile. The CBO estimate's really instructive here. Originally, the proposal, without any restrictions, was going to raise something about roughly $200 billion over 10 years by increased audits, more enforcement, and the like. Well, when the Idaho senator, Senator Crapo, said, well, I want an amendment that guarantees no one making under $400,000 will get audited, that the rates won't increase, the CBO came back and said, well, if you do that, you're going to get $20 billion less in revenue. So something's up here. Quite obviously, Secretary Janet Yellen's instruction to the IRS commissioner has loopholes in it.
Speaking of which, this is what she wrote before the vote. The additional $80 billion, quote, shall not be used to increase the share of small business or households below the 400,000 threshold that are audited. So contrary to the White House, she explains only that the new audits would not be directed disproportionately at the middle class. That doesn't mean there will be less audits. It just means it would not be disproportionate to those earning more than 400,000. What's your thoughts to this?
Yeah, see, you're spot on there. What the secretary is doing is parsing words, and our whole tax system is about parsing words. What they're saying is that audit rates have declined across the board for all incomes, but that the IRS will not use this money to increase audit rates for the middle class above historic levels. Well, historic levels pre-pandemic were a lot higher for the middle class for audits than they are now. That just means they can make up for lost ground without violating some kind of directive that the secretary has issued, which is confusing in the first place. The audits for the middle class will be rising, perhaps not as much as for the wealthy, but they will be going up.
Pete, I want to show you very quickly these two maps. Now, we showed these maps just a minute ago. One is a map from ProPublica. It's an investigation of the most audited states, and they compared that to the poor states in America. Some lawmakers are claiming that's because, if you see and you look at the maps right here, there seems to be some kind of similarities. That's what they're claiming. Some lawmakers claim that's because people who are in some of the poorest states, or some of the states that are not as affluent, don't have money for big-time attorneys like big corporations, and will just pay the IRS to avoid litigation so they can collect easy money. What's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's part of the equation. The fact is, many of the IRS audits taking place in poorer areas are on folks who claim the earned income tax credit or child tax credits. They don't have the resources to necessarily contest the IRS in court or even go through the appeals process, because with that, you often need your own tax representative, and that costs even outside of court. Now, the fact is that large corporations do have resources to fight back, but one reason that the IRS tends to target lower and middle income places is that the issues are less complicated. Some of these audits of large corporations drag on for a decade because the questions of law the IRS can't even figure out. It takes a long time to decide who is right, and sometimes it's not the government.
You keep hearing about this 15% tax on large corporations. Tell us how this will affect the average person right now watching from home.
It will be passed along to consumers in the form of higher prices, to shareholders in the form of lower returns, to workers in the form of lower wages or less benefits. The Congressional Budget Office even says this. There is a pass-through effect. You levy a tax on business, and it's not as if the business goes under the couch cushions and finds the money. Somebody else has to share in the pain, and it's often the middle class.
Pete Sepp, president of the National Taxpayers Union. We appreciate you joining us this morning. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Ahead this morning, eliminate stand, shut